I lost pretty much everything. You come in, you pay your $80, $100, and they give you a piece of paper and you walk away. But there's no real monitoring of what's happening. All I wanted to do was just survive. Just by the sheer will of it, like talking to the deputy director of the FDA and like holding them accountable and reading verbatim their own content to their face and like expecting them to take action. We all want to be the hero, right? So if we as patient advocates can call that out, instead of calling people out, call them up into who they truly are.
All right, here we go. Kelly Barta, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, happy to be here, JP.
Yeah. I didn't expect you to say yes, but I really appreciate that you did. I think you're one of the OGs out there when it comes to the TSW community. I did some Googling and some LinkedIning, just so whoever's listening knows who we're talking about. Like, first of all, I've got it all written down in this little notebook here. You are involved in ITSAN, which is the International Topical Steroid Advocacy Network, right?
Awareness network.
Awareness. Okay.
Yep, you got it.
And you were the executive director for a period between 2017, 2018. Then you were the president and CEO in some period during the 2018, 2019 time period. Then you were involved in the National Eczema Association, where you were the manager of Grass Roots Advocacy, 2019. Yes. Then senior manager of advocacy, 2019, 2020. Then you were involved, which you are currently in the Coalition of Skin Diseases, where you were the secretary from 2019 to 2020. Then president, which you are presently, and you're also the executive director since 2022.
Yes.
And on top of that, you're also the author of To Eczema with Love, and no, Sean Connery has nothing to do with that. It's a book about eczema, TSW, and a life beyond. And I think most importantly, you went through TSW starting in, I believe it was 2012.
Correct.
So that's a lot. Like, I think there's a lot of content out there about TSW, mostly about what we're going through, how it feels, and the trauma of it. But you're out there actually doing stuff. I think it's really important to spread awareness through showing photos and stuff, but I think it's equally as important of like, what's the next step? And I think you're one of the shining examples of that. So yeah, I love to try to focus. We can talk about what you went through as much as you like, but I also really want to touch on what people who are going through this can do, because it's just such a dark hole, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And for the first bit of it, all I wanted to do was just survive. And my plan was I get better, I get back to my life. But it really was because it was so severe and so prolonged that and when I was looking for resources, there were none. In 2012, I was looking on Amazon, looking for books or looking for anything. There was a handful of pieces of literature in science that nobody was paying attention to. And that was it, right? There was ITSAN. There were a couple like teleconferences with Dr. Rappaport. And I listened to those. I heard a doctor acknowledging that this was a real thing. And that was all we had. So, you know, like I said, my plan was just to get back to my life, but I knew I couldn't. Like at a certain point, I thought somebody has to speak up and this has to change. I went through, well, we all do, but hell, like not just with my body, but my family and my whole life got turned upside down. And I actually was hospitalized with herpeticum at 4 years TSW, almost lost my life. And it was after that I was in such a dark place. I just didn't want to fight anymore. I just had given it my all. I was ready to give up. And then something happened. I write about it in my book. And it was like this fire started just like rising up in me and consuming me. And I thought, you know, whatever it's going to take, I will fight this with all I have, whether it kills me or I make it through to the other side. I'm going to fight this with everything that I have. And so it was after that I began to really reach out to ITSAN to see how I could help out. And one door just led to the next, to the next, to the next. And it was interesting even coming on with ITSAN because I felt like I was like this plan was downloaded in my brain, like this has to happen, which will lead to this, kind of like dominoes, like chick, 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 chick. Once we get all of these things accomplished, then we'll be okay. So I personally feel like I can't walk away until I see those things accomplished. I just feel like a personal obligation because of what I've gone through. And I think the depth of suffering that we all experience, it's kind of like that pulling back of the rubber band. Like the further you're pulled back, the more you suffer, the more you just launch out. Like, I will do something about this. Yeah. So I can't walk away. There's just too much at stake. There are too many people suffering without being recognized and helped. So,
yeah. I think it's hard for me to remember everything that I went through. I think you can probably relate. It's just so traumatic. Your brain kind of like blocks part of it out. But
yeah,
there's something, I hate to say it because it's so horrible, but there is something beautiful in a way about it, because it just pushes you into a hole so hard that it shaves away everything but who you really are.
Yes.
And I'm aware, like, I said this on the last podcast, but my traditional Chinese medicine doctor, Olivia Friedman, I told her that I was, very close to giving up. And if it wasn't for my family and my wife, who was living with me at the time, I probably would have given up. And I told her, I'm willing to fight for my life. I'm ready to go. And she's like, not everyone is like that. And it's fascinating to see what it does to a human. And sometimes you have to be there to truly care. Like, it's really hard for people to explain this to other people. And I get such a sense of there's such an anger, like you said, there's a fire in you as well. And me personally, I have hard time parsing out and partitioning my anger for what happened to me and what I did to myself and how to move forward, because you can't just scream and yell. I was wondering if you had any insight on how do you do that, because you've gone so much further, I think, than most people have in that.
Well, it's all about channeling the anger, right? And the grief. That's what I think it is. It's taking all of that as fuel to bring change and bring meaning out of the suffering that you've gone through. Because there's something it's almost redemptive when you can see change happen and you know that it wasn't for nothing that you went through this. And something that I realized going through TSW, like you said, I felt like it was a metamorphosis, like I was turned into goo, everything inside of me, and really remade into the person I truly was. I didn't realize that I was living a lot of my life for everybody else's expectations and who they thought I should be, instead of being me. That was a beautiful gift I was given through TSW. And I started walking into that, which was amazing. But again, yes, I'm angry. I'm as angry as everybody else. Like, I lost pretty much everything. And there's such a sense of grief around that goes very, very, very deep. And like I said, after that time with herpeticum and my marriage was falling apart, I was married 21 years, and this does a number on the family. It's not just the person going through it. But I remember falling to the ground and just like weeping, like I had nothing left. And it really was, like I said, this spiritual experience where this fire started rising up. Like I felt like I was barely any embers and coals left, like I just was dying inside. And it just started raging up, and all of the grief, the perplexity, like, I can't believe this happened to me. I can't believe we have such a broken system that this just continues, even when we have the knowledge about what's happening. And then what happened to my kids and my marriage and myself, and then dealing physically with the pain chronically is just a heavy, heavy burden. But turning that into, I will fight this with everything that I have, but being smart about it and seeing the long game. Because I think as humans, fear is natural, anger is natural, blame is natural, right? It's easy to just point a finger and say, doctors are horrible and pharma is evil and this and that, all of it, because the anger's front and center. But if we can see past it, like, okay, what does change look like? How do we actually fix this so that it stops? We have to look past that, right? And we have to look at the long game and think, you know, what is it going to take for us to actually get there? And it's a lot of diplomacy. It's a lot of putting aside my own personal anger in order to do something about this. And it really can be the fuel. I know, you know, my personality, I was very shy. I was a little girl standing behind my mom all the time. I was very intimidated by people's roles and titles. I always felt like, well, I'm not smart enough for that, or I don't know enough to speak to this person. What this fire did was burn all of that away, all of my inhibitions, all the intimidation, all of it. Because my one focus was, we have to fix this. And I don't care who I have to talk to and what I need to say. I'm telling you, sometimes it sort of like blows my mind where I've gone just by the sheer will of it, like talking to the deputy director of the FDA and like holding them accountable and reading verbatim their own content to their face and like expecting them to take action. I'm thinking, who is this person? You know, it wasn't old me. But it really was what TSW did. And then just that fire that burned away all the stuff that was holding me back. So it really is kind of cool to think when you don't have anything to lose anymore, you're kind of dangerous, right? Like,
yeah,
you're willing to do whatever it takes.
That's why the Joker is the greatest villain of all time. And that's I mean, I hate to bring up films in the middle of a topical steroid withdrawal thing, but that's when Batman is trying to interrogate Joker. And normally he gets criminals to tell him what he wants by beating them to a pulp. And he quickly finds out this guy has absolutely nothing to lose. He doesn't care whether, you know what I mean? And I think, no, we're obviously not villains, but I do think that, I think it's really interesting how it got you to a point where you realize that we do live in a country where people can take the action and they can take it straight to the office of the USDA.
Yes,
but most of us are complacent about it. We don't realize it. And frankly, I didn't realize it until I saw on ITSAN's website that I could just fill out a form and go straight to the Senate. Like it was easy.
Exactly.
You know, and
when I first got involved in advocacy, I heard the same thing from my senator. Like hardly anybody gets involved in this sort of stuff. And I thought to myself, well, I get it. That was me. Because you feel like it's this other, you know, area that I don't know anything about political science, and you guys do your thing, I'll do my thing and live my life and we'll all be good. But man, we've got this incredible system and we're not using it. And so when you realize the power of just showing up, number one, showing up, telling your story, just getting involved and getting a seat at the table, we're all humans. And I think my work in advocacy has shown me the greatest power that we have is story. I mean, kind of across the board, because as humans, that's what we resonate with the most. And it's what gets people to take action. When you can hook them with your story and then they really feel that compassion, like I can be a hero. I remember, this is a crazy little side story. I was in DC for some work I was doing, and it was during COVID. And the only time, you know, you could take your mask off at that time was if you're in a restaurant, right? So there's this tiny little restaurant at one of the gates in DC airport. And I got a table. I'm like, yes. I sat down with my computer and I took my mask off when I'm working because I had about an hour to kill. And this guy's just hanging around my table. And it was like kind of getting to me, like annoying me. Like he was just sort of like, I knew he wanted to sit down, but I didn't want to talk to anybody. Finally, I gave in and I let him sit down, and I could tell he wanted to chat. I finally was like, fine. I closed my laptop. We start talking, and come to find out he was a screenwriter in Hollywood. And he's like, well, why are you here in DC? And I started telling him the TSW story. And he's like, you know what? It's pretty cool that the doctors are the, I think I'm going to get this right, the anti-villain. Like you think that they're
anti-hero, or?
Yes, anti-hero. Yeah. You think that they're the villain, but they actually can be the hero. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time it really hit me like, wow, a lot of that is in the messaging and calling the hero out of people. We all want to be the hero, right? Mm-hmm. Even if you think of like these agencies and the institutions and people in Congress, we all want to do the right thing and be the hero. So if we as patient advocates can call that out, instead of calling people out, call them up into who they truly are and who they want to be, and we can make the world a better place together. So that's a pretty cool thing.
That's ingenious, because that's kind of the vibe that I got when I spoke with my senator in Maine. Is it was like they were eager to do it.
Yeah.
Like the staff was eager to put this through. And when I spoke with Senator Kime, shout out to Senator Kime, she was like, it's exactly what you're saying. She was like given the opportunity
Yes.
to be that hero. And I'm sure there's a part of it that is inherently political, like, hey, this is another win. But I do think that being a politician, I'm just a kid, right? I'm 26. I have no idea what it's like to be in that place. But you surrounded by people who have probably been there most of their professional lives. Everyone's in their bubble and they're focusing on probably fighting and this and that and that and this. And along the way, you probably lose a connection to the people that you're supposed to be serving. And so, yeah, when you just have a story, you give them a kit to sign. It's already written for you.
It's all done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Any time I've ever spoken with a representative, it's through these little kits of anything I care about, and it has like a kit prepared for it, and I just copy and paste. I read the whole thing, obviously, but it just makes it easy. But that's so smart, because I have a really hard time like believing that there's pure evil in the world. Right? Like, I don't want to believe that these doctors really do have like malintent, even though there's evidence to suggest that they would. But I think deep inside of, a doctor with a white coat folding his arms at you, there's a little boy or a little girl who wanted to help people. Like, that's why they went to school. You know?
Yes, 100%. Talking about films, when I watched the movie Unbroken, did you see it? With
that's the one in World War II.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how at the very end, he went back to his tormentors in Japan when he was in a POW camp, because he realized the only road to healing is forgiveness and reconciliation. And when I watched the end of that movie, because I remember thinking during the film, it's just one bad thing after another, after another, after another. I'm like, it has to stop. Like, my brain can't take another like devastation in this guy's life. But I feel like that's what TSW is too, isn't it? It's like one bad thing after another, after another. It's like, I just can't handle anymore. Well, at the very end, for him to go back and address those people who had abused him and extend forgiveness, I knew it. Like, I felt this stone drop in me. Like, you have to go back to your doctor. And you know what's crazy to me is that it felt like going back to a rapist. That's literally how it felt, because it ruined my life. And it was 9 years. And once I started TSW, I never saw him again, because it was like, why would I? I didn't feel like he ever took me seriously. He was always shutting me down and kind of dismissive. So when I started TSW, first I was too sick, and then I was too just spitting angry about the whole thing that I wouldn't go back. But I realized I have to talk to him, because if he doesn't know, he's just going to keep treating people the same way. So I summoned up the courage to call the office. Believe it or not, the only way I could get an audience with him was to do a lunch and learn and pay for lunch for the whole office staff, which I was so mad at that. I was like, tears were coming out of my eyes when I'm listening to the receptionist on the phone. She's like, yeah, and here's all of our allergy lists. No mangoes, no this, no that, whatever. And you can go to this restaurant. And I was like, I was like fantasizing the kind of lunch I wanted to bring. Anyway, I showed up and I sat down with him. And by this time, we talked to the FDA several times. We've been going to DC and talking about it. We've done all this advocacy work. So I had a lot of leverage behind me. And I'm thinking to myself, you should be, honored that I'm coming to you like a little podunk doctor in Georgia to tell you about TSW and taking time to do this. And so anyway, I sat down with him. We're eating our lunch, our subs, and I'm telling him all about it. And he just listened quietly. And especially when I'm telling him how it ruined my family life and all the stuff that's happening to my kids, it got really quiet and pretty heavy. And he said, it's interesting that you're telling me this, because I had a man in here just yesterday and I could not figure out what was going on with him. I think this is what it is. Right?
Wow.
So these things are so hard to do, but this is how we change history, right?
Yeah. You
We
make a
have to
really good point.
be willing to go back, tell the story, because we're all humans. And doctors are practicing medicine. This is another thing that it took a long time for me to realize. They're not taught to be curious and to be investigators. That's the investigative dermatologist role. They learn medicine, they're taught certain things, and now they're practicing it. So they have 8 minutes with a patient. You come in, you show them your skin, you talk a little bit about your stuff, and they know, okay, well, here are my tools in my toolkit. 1, 2, 3. And usually it's 1, topical steroids. They send you on your way. So when a patient comes in and says, well, I think I have this and I found it on the internet, the doctor's like, oh no, here we go. Number 1, it's like time restraint. Number 2, it's like someone with like Dr. Google telling them how to do their job. And it's because there's not a lot of awareness around this. There's not a lot of education. The doctor really doesn't know what it is. And so you have your patients schooling you on what they have. It can feel very threatening. This is what I've heard from doctors.
Yeah.
And so then they were like, well, I have never heard about this. And the patient says, well, you're dismissing me and gaslighting me, right? So it's like this back and forth, missing each other and this breakdown of the relationship. And because when you're suffering with TSW, you're already in so much pain. To have someone not acknowledge you, it's like you're so inflammatory. And I think this is where the anger just like starts to just become this volcano inside of people. And then they're like, well, forget you. I don't need medicine anymore. And now they're on their own, which is really scary that they're getting their information and their help from people online who don't know what the heck they're doing, right? They're like trying breast milk or urine or all these kinds of crazy things on their skin. It's like, So then doctors see this too, and they're like, this is the Wild West. This is crazy. Right. So it's this ongoing challenge of like, how do we bring the temperature down on both sides so doctors can actually listen to their patients? Patients are willing to be vulnerable and tell the story and go back. I'm telling you, every scientist that I brought this to and like give them presentation, they're hands down. Of course, this is not eczema. This is clearly something else. I mean, it doesn't take anything to like convince them of what's happening. But it's just that disconnect that's in medicine because they've been trained a certain way, and to see it as eczema, that they're just, it's not on their radar. And so it's a lot of education that has to happen. But in order for the education to happen, it's like we need the science with the evidence to prove what's happening. And I think that's why we've been working our way backward to try to like, the science is the linchpin. That's why this study with Dr. Miles is so amazing, because it's helping to show that this is not eczema, which has been the great debate, right?
Yes.
So.
Yeah. I mean, this is exactly why I had you on, because these are the exact type of deep questions that come up in a person's mind when they're going through it. How did this happen to me? How can I convince my doctor? How is this ever going to change? And I mean, I had a bunch of questions. I think you just kind of answered them all in that one part. So I'm trying to pick apart pieces of that. Because it's like, oh man, yeah. I think I definitely need to go back to the doctor that I would say kind of gaslit me into this. I do think I need to go back, but I think a good time to do that is when I'm a little bit more over the fence. I've come a long way, but I think for most people, I imagine it would be a lot easier when you're not like in the doldrums of TSW, because you can say at least like, look, like my skin looks so much better and I did this without steroids, like something's going on.
Yeah.
And I do agree. Like there was a transition where I was pure anger, and then my parents kind of talked me through it because they were more on the side of the doctors, and then I had to convince them what was going on with me. And then they told me, like, from their perspective, it's exactly what you just said. I mean, they're just a human being and they're trained in a certain way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about the study with Ian Miles, because that blew me away. How did that come about?
You know what? It's crazy. What I have found with this whole TSW cause is everything's happening through like back doors and very untraditional, unconventional type ways. I see our cause like water, and water hits a lot of obstacles, but it will get to where it's going to go, right? It's very powerful. So it's been a lot of knocking on doors, a lot of just trying this and trying that and talking to this person and talking to that person. The way that study came about um, was that I was working on a federal resolution. So you got a state resolution passed in the state of Maine, but we're also working on a federal level to try to get several things done on that in that sphere, because if we can do that, that will help with any action taken place by FDA and some of these like research, that sort of thing, right? If it's coming down from the top, it's always helpful. So I was trying to get endorsements for the resolution from doctors and other people in medicine saying this is a real thing. Because if it's just a patient advocacy group and we don't have a lot of backing, it's hard to move things forward, right? So I had gotten a lot of endorsements from MDs, but I was thinking to myself, oh gosh, I had met Ian Miles at a National Eczema Association conference. He was speaking about the environment and how it's affecting eczema, like it's really driving eczema. He had a lot of crazy things to say, but it was resonating so much with me. I went up to him after his session, which I listened to twice in a row because it was so good. It's like I wanted to absorb it all. I went up to him. I'm like, can I have 5 or 10 or 15 minutes with you later? Like, can I please talk to you just for a few minutes? So we ended up talking during a dinner for like 45 minutes, eyeball to eyeball. Like I was just telling him all the TSW stuff. He told me later, he was thinking, who is this crazy lady? Are you like anti-medicine? But then he started looking into TSW and getting pretty curious about it. Like, wow, why is this such a huge grassroots movement? But there has been not 1 cent put toward research by the NIH. He said any other topic that's really even controversial, you'll find loads, like mountains of evidence, like autism and vaccines and all that kind of stuff. There's tons and tons of science being done. Not 1 penny toward TSW. No one has even submitted for a grant around this. So he thought that was pretty weird. And then I had reached out to him because I thought getting an endorsement from somebody at the NIH would be pretty cool. And so when I talked to him about it, he's like, well, I can't because that would be seen as a conflict of interest because I work for the government. But I think he felt bad that he couldn't help. So then he's like, well, I think you should talk to this person at NIH and this person, whatever. And he started like making connections for me and making introductions. And we actually then presented to a group called the Atopic Dermatitis Research Network. They're the ones who get all the funding from NIH to do eczema research. It was like $28 million last funding. And they're like 10 different institutions across the United States. They have thousands of patients. And so we did a presentation to them. We keep on like kind of pushing them like, hey, will you please make this a priority? Anyway, in the meantime, there was another initiative going on that I can't tell you all the things about, but they were wanting to do some biopsies on TSW patients for a study, and they were asking ITSAN to help recruit for that. And so we're like, well, we want to know more about that if we're going to be recruiting for you. And we weren't given a lot of information, but we were told about like how much these labs would cost. And that it was minuscule. And so I'm asking Ian Miles at NIH, what can you actually test for in a lab, like a biopsy that would cost this much? He's like, well, basically nothing. And so then we're talking back and forth. He's like, why don't you just have him send the biopsies to NIH? We'll do the analysis. And so we're trying to work all this stuff out. And in the meantime, he's getting more and more curious. And he's like, well, I wonder if it's this that's causing TSW. And he was like listing all of these ideas he had. And it felt like literally like Christmas morning, because to be talking to someone in science who has a lot of knowledge about tons of different diseases and public health and the human body was like, this is awesome to like have this brain to just kind of tease all these things out with. So he's getting more and more curious. And he said, finally, why don't we just do a small study here at the NIH? Out of his own lab's funds. So we didn't even have to submit a grant to get funding, to get somebody interested to run the study. He just got interested enough to do it. And you know what blew my mind, JP? Because first of all, he's like, well, let's just do 5 people. And then he had introduced me to a pharmacogeneticist in UK about looking at the DNA aspect of this. Is there something in our DNA that predisposes us to TSW where other people can use steroids and no problem, right? So we're talking to this guy in UK together. And this guy was like, there's no way that you can do a study with 5 people. You need it to be larger than that. So Ian's like, well, why don't we just open it up to however many people will come who are local to the DC area or who are willing to fly in, and we'll just do this small pilot, which will hopefully crack the door open for larger studies that need to happen to really bring like the massive change. So we just opened it up in our community. We had 16 people who were willing to go, like either fly there from out of state or drive and show up. And I'm telling you, some of the people who did it were in like the throes of TSW. It was, yeah, I had the privilege of meeting several of them, and that was amazing. But what blew my mind was, and it was right around Easter, because I remember the moment I was sitting on my back porch with my parents. They were here. And I opened up my laptop, and Ian had sent me an email saying, hey, I understand that some of these people are having a really difficult time physically. I'm willing to drive an hour out to do a house visit with them to do this. I started crying. I couldn't believe it, because I'm like,
making me emotional.
Yeah, who does this anymore? And even like the people who weren't and were a part of that study just felt so cared for by that team. They were so compassionate. They were acknowledging what was happening and so sorry, just really gentle and kind. It was healing on multiple levels. You know, I had one girl tell me I just cried when I left their office because I just felt so cared for. And when you're in TSW, you just feel like you don't know who to trust. You're just like in trauma all the time, right? So that was amazing. So they were looking at, you probably know about the study, but we did like microbiome swabs, we did blood labs, we did biopsies. So they were looking at it from all different angles, and all angles told the same story of what was happening. And it was discovered like pretty quick that there was a dysfunction in the mitochondria that was happening in us. And they've never even seen this in science. So they're showing it around at NIH saying, oh my gosh, can you believe this? So that was pretty crazy.
Complex 1, right? That basically just gets broken.
Wow. Yes, and it's pumping out like lots of vitamin B3, niacin.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool, because it's like, all right, well, now we can show that this is different than just plain old eczema, because they looked at it at a deeper level. Because all of the stuff before then has just been like basic histology. They're just looking at certain markers that are coming up atopic dermatitis, which ours did too in this study. But Ian was like, well, of course you would, because most of you started out as eczema. So of course you're going to have those markers, but you have to look deeper than that. So then, because that had been discovered so quickly, he brought all of us on a Zoom call, which was amazing. This is not something they do at NIH typically. But he said, listen, we have to keep all the information between us. Otherwise, the NIH will shut something like this down. But I would love to start like a phase 2 of this study. Why don't we try to do something to, be a possible treatment, which they found, supplement berberine targets this particular problem, and it has a pharmaceutical equivalent, which is metformin. It's a type 2 diabetes drug. And so we split our group up, and whoever was willing to take metformin did that, and whoever was willing to take berberine did that. And we did it at different dosages because it was kind of exploratory. It's like, we don't know what dosage will work or what will work, but let's just give it a try. So that was the next 3 or 4 months that we did that. And we would go back. I think I was at the NIH maybe 3 times for different biopsies and blood work, just to take a look at what was happening. And so that study is now in preprint. We have submitted, or they have submitted, to several different journals, but I'm telling you, there's so much controversy around TSW still. I've heard this from other doctors like Dr. Newell, that they try to submit publications and they're not accepted because the journals really are the gatekeepers. If they're biased or they don't agree or they don't like it, they're not going to publish it. So this is another barrier that we have. So right now, this paper has been submitted to a journal, and we're just waiting on revisions and things like that. But if it's published, he said, I've already talked to people at the NIH. We will shout this from the mountaintops, what's happening. So I know.
Oh, yeah. That would be really like a Christmas morning.
Yes, so right?
Many people. Yeah, I remember hearing about it, reading it, and just being blown away. I mean, it's just, I think I heard from somebody, I think it might have been Dr. Friedman, said he was kind of comparing it to like just opening the door. But as you know fully well, anybody who's got TSW is so hungry for any acknowledgement.
Yes.
Just anything. And for me, it was like, there it is. They're looking at it. It is different than eczema. And I just want to say to all the viewers, that is happening. Like, someday we will be able to go to the doctor and they'll be like, I don't know if you should be using this this cream for that long, which for me, that's what I can't get over. I'm kind of flip-flopping all over the place, but I just said it. So here we go. The one thing I think you may have touched on this earlier, but the one thing I really am having trouble with is you go to the doctor, you have eczema, maybe you're already going through TSW, and you say, look at my skin. I don't know what's going on. Can you help me? And they go, here's the topical steroids. And you go, but isn't that just a temporary solution?
Yeah.
And they go, yeah, no. But you have a genetic skin disease. You just have bad skin. You're going to have to take something for the foreseeable future. So let's do this. And maybe, the worst that could happen is some skin thinning. But then you go online, and not just on Google, but if it's like, I think it's the Association for like Family Practitioners website or something. It's not just steroid induced atrophy, but a whole plethora of crazy side effects. So my family and I were thinking to ourselves, like, are they reading the label? Because the refills just keep coming in without a follow-up.
Right.
Something's not lining up here,
Right. I think that the idea is just that these are pretty safe, and it's just on rare occasions that these things can happen, like the risks. And, we'll keep an eye out, but we don't really have to worry about that because that's not going to be you. And I always felt that about myself. Well, I read about HPA axis suppression. I'm like, well, that's not me. I'm a healthy person. I wouldn't have Cushing's syndrome, right? And then you think if they're willing to prescribe it, like sounds like my experience was the same as yours. Like they don't even look at my skin anymore. They just write the script. You come in, you pay your $80, $100, and they give you a piece of paper and you walk away. But there's no real monitoring of what's happening. And the crazy thing, I heard the same thing from my doctor. You have a hereditary disease. Don't try to figure it out. You're going to drive yourself crazy. You're going to need steroids the rest of your life. So they really believe that these are very safe. And you know what blows my mind is that this drug has no dose and no max time frame. No max dose, no max time frame. What drug has that? It's kind of like, could you imagine if you took ibuprofen with no dose, you just keep taking it until your headache goes away? Well, by that time, you would also be dead of an overdose.
Yeah. Well, they tell you like on the box, they say, I think the most common I've seen is like apply 2 to 3 times a day as needed for 30 days. But they give you a freaking tube.
Yes.
And I don't know how linked you are to the cold atmospheric plasma community at all, but over there, they've got this team that's been working and trying to heal people for 15 years. And they're they're also talking about not how long you've used it, but how much.
Yeah.
And when you have these methods like wet wrapping, and I mean, you're lathering that stuff on. And to quickly hop back to the Ian Miles study, I mean, not just Ian Miles, but a whole bunch of other doctors, they were talking about just what happens when you put steroids on normal skin. What happens to it?
Right.
And like, can we, where is this? Like, I don't know. It just really, grinds my gears, I guess. It's like I can't figure out, but that's why I'm really happy to have you on the show, is because you're actually working towards breaking down those walls, telling people, because I think I agree with you. I think they really do think they're helping. They really believe it works. They just haven't seen it. And like myself, most people will not go back to the doctor, right? Because they're just like, they're so traumatized. So we really do depend on these organizations that you're a part of to make the change. And also, if you're listening, there's a very easy way to get to the Senate, like I did. And is it Brianna who did the other one?
Brianna's mom did it in Florida. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. It's simple. You go onto the ITSAN website. I'll put the link below, and you just follow the directions. They have the whole resolution there for you. And if you're well enough to go. And it's, for me, I started crying because the whole Senate stood up and they were like, of course this is real. Like,
that's amazing. And you know what's crazy too? I agree with you. Like, it's like we're so used to the pushback because the only people we've talked to about this are like our medical providers. And if they don't believe in it, you just feel like you're this crazy idiot. And then you go into something like the Senate, you tell them a story and they're like, oh, that's horrible. I'm so sorry. And they're like, they want to work with you and they want to help you. I'm like, I wasn't used to this. I was expecting it, to feel like a crazy person again. But there's not that like disconnect when you talk to people who are in these other, like in science, like I was mentioning, when I talk to scientists, they're like, wow, clearly this is his own thing. But again, I wanted to bring up too, by some of the stuff that we were talking about with the dosing. When we talked with FDA, we were showing them, number one, about there's no max dose, there's no max time frame. People don't even know, like, there was maybe one label we saw that said don't use over 20% of your body, and that was for children because of that HbA access suppression with adrenals. But it's like, who knows how to calculate 20% of their body surface area? Probably nobody, you know? So, and then when it's not even, they don't even give you a fingertip unit. Some people talk about that, but even that, it's like, well, what does that mean? You know, like I can use one on my hand, and this is so ambiguous. Like the labels say, use on affected area as needed. Don't use over 2 weeks, but then they prescribe for years to decades. So it's like, well, all of this doesn't really make sense. In my mind, I was thinking, don't use on the same spot for more than 2 weeks. Because if my doctor's giving it to me over and over again, it must be that, like, because that would thin my skin, right? That's the sense I made out of it. But we told the FDA, listen, not only do we need the warning of topical steroid addiction and withdrawal on the label, like this is a risk, so that when doctors and patients look at this medicine, they see this is a potential outcome. But we also need, you know, better guidelines around using it, because they can be very helpful. If you short term, just once for poison ivy or something, okay. But using it to manage a chronic condition is not okay. You know, especially as flares get smaller and smaller, or like, I mean, the breaks get smaller and smaller between flares. Now it's like this slippery slope where you're using it all the time. So it's not just we need the warning of TSW, we need better usage guidelines, but we need on the box itself that it's a steroid, because a lot of people don't even realize it's a steroid. It just has some long molecular name on it, beta-methazone dipropionate. Well, what's that? It's just a medicine. And then we need a potency level, which UK is now doing this. That's one of the actions that they're taking, is there are different classes of topical steroids, you know, like the very mild to the super potent, but most people aren't even aware of that. So these are all things that would be pretty easy to change, even if it's just labeling it a steroid and the potency, because a lot of people who have eczema also have allergies and asthma. So they're using inhaled steroids, nebulizers, ear drops, eye drops, nasal sprays. It's like people are getting all sorts of steroids. I don't know if you knew that we ran a study, or I ran a survey in 2021 looking at the exposure and cumulative effects of steroids in eczema patients. We had over 2,000 people fill it out. And we just took a look at how much steroid they were exposed to over their lifetime. And then we asked if they had developed TSW as a way to kind of gauge what's happening, like get a better picture of it. And you know, over 90% were using topicals, another 36% were on inhaled, 32% taking oral, 26% nasal sprays. When we showed that to the FDA, it was like this speechless moment. Like they had no idea that this was what was happening. And the other piece of that story, which kind of like was super crazy to me, I worked with Allergy and Asthma Network for its season, and they were doing a steroid stewardship campaign around oral steroids for asthma. And they looked at insurance claims data. So it's like everything that goes to the insurance companies. If you have, like, say, asthma and you get this certain medicine and then you develop these other diseases over time, they looked at, you know, what is a threshold of oral steroid use before you develop things like osteoporosis, diabetes, things that are directly related to that use. Do you know what it was over a lifetime? Because it is cumulative, which means the more you use, the higher your risk. It was 1 gram over a lifetime. So when I heard that, which is like 4 rounds of steroids, if I'm correct. When I heard that, I'm thinking, we have been exposed to so much steroid, right? And I never knew that it was cumulative. I didn't know that it was hiding in a lot of products, even chapsticks. You know, there's a lot of like feminine products have steroids. It's crazy.
Oh my God.
Skin lightening creams. Yeah. So it's important that we know this and we know the risk. Yeah.
Oh my God. Anytime I hear something about that, I'm like, I start looking around my room. I'm like, what has steroids in it? I'm going to throw that stuff out. Yeah. I mean, I made an analogy to my wife the other day. It's like let's say I'm an alcoholic and I was very sad, depressed, lonely, and I started drinking because I was very depressed and lonely. And then I realize I'm an alcoholic. And I go to the doctor and I say, "Doctor, I think I'm an alcoholic. I am depressed and lonely. And this alcohol is making me less depressed and lonely for a little bit, but I'm addicted to it. And it's really screwing up my body." And they go, "What kind of alcohol do you drink?" You know, I have a couple, I have a couple beers, maybe a couple glasses of wine. And they go, those are rookie numbers in this racket. You got to have some moonshine and you got to have some whiskey. Now come back to me in 2 weeks. And it's like,
Yes.
I mean, yeah, we have no clue. We're just scratching the surface as to what steroids do to a person's body. And then again, there's also the comparison of like, that guy, that muscly guy, he's on steroids. He's on anabolic steroids. That's really bad for him. But those creams, totally fine.
Right?
Right.
Yes. The other thing that's really crazy is like, why can't you believe that this cream is having this bad outcome when you can believe all these antibiotics people have reactions to? It's like, we know so many drugs have certain reactions with certain people, and they're like, oh yeah, don't use that. Why is there so much disconnect with steroids where now we're all called steroid phobic, right?
Oh,
and that's
yeah,
another thing we always ask, like,
steroid
what other pharmaceutical has the word phobic connected to it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question here. This is one thing I worry about. I did a little video on this. There's a website, I think it's called openpayments.cms.gov or something like that. And you can see the kickbacks that certain doctors get. And I found that, I won't name the doctor's name, but this is the doctor that told me, steroids are no problem. I would have given you a whole bunch. Here's a whole bunch. And if not, do Dupixent. And I looked up this doctor's name, and he had received, I think in 2023 alone, like $60,000 from Regeneron, mostly. And I wonder, like, does that play a role with steroids as well? Because I can't really pinpoint who manufactures the steroids themselves, but I know Dupixent is a whole other box of frogs. But do you think that there's some capture into just regular doctors? Because I know that there was a similar sort of situation with the Sackler family and the opioid crisis and stuff like that.
I couldn't speak to it exactly because I don't know as far as like what those payments would actually be for. Because if you think, did they show up at an event where they had an advisory role, like this company wanted to hear about eczema and how are they treating it, but they pay them for their time? There's no way for you and I to know. Or did they speak on behalf of the drug and they were kind of, giving they call it a product theater, where they tell you about this new drug that's coming out. Was it payment for that? I don't know. That doesn't show you that piece, right?
Yeah, it's very vague. They say like payments not having to do strictly with consultation. And then if you go, you can see the spreadsheet and it will show like $10 here, $11 there. And so it's very vague. I think potentially intentionally. I don't want to like make something more of what is, right? Like it's probably most of it more benign, but I just think personally, if I was a doctor and a certain company was treating me really well and sending me to a bunch of events, taking me out to lunch and stuff like that, I'd probably be more like, oh, that's a great company. They treat me really nice. I'm able to afford that second home. Like, this is the best drug for you. Like, I don't know. I mean,
yeah, it's like you have to be careful with conjecture and assuming.
Yeah.
I personally think it may have, like, as far as doctors giving people steroids, more to do with the fact that this has been the one tool in the toolbox, not just for eczema, but for almost every skin disease across the board for the last 50 years. It's cheap, it's effective. And by and large, because they haven't known about TSW, they have felt that is very safe. So in my mind, I feel like that's probably driving a lot more of the prescription. I don't know, though. I can't say because I don't know where those doctors are getting their funding from. But it is true. It's like once you get finances involved, the optics of that can be whatever. whatever that person wants them or perceives them to be. And ITSAN has been very careful about that because we know our community is hypersensitive to that whole thing, right? Because we're in a place that we don't know who we can trust. So we want to be very careful that we protect that trust and keep the message crystal clear that we're here on behalf of patients to be that voice to the people who can change this. So yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad I asked that question because I think that probably just goes back to parsing and partitioning out anger and using it more for forgiveness and reconciliation and stuff like that. And I think that's difficult for me because I want to turn over some rock and find some conspiracy so I can be like, aha, but yeah, I think at the end of the day, you're right.
Well, I remember someone saying to me, the only way you're going to change anything is by people feeling it financially. So you got to sue people, and make them feel it, which I think is probably true to some degree. If you look at the opioid crisis, it really was public pressure. And it was this lawsuit with the Sackler family. And then it's just one lawsuit after another, and it's all sort of coming down. That was one of the very first things that I did was reach out to a lawyer because I thought if I can somehow make this worth my family's while, then it will ease some of the suffering and, give back a little bit because it's sad because this really happened to us, but I feel like I did this to my family too, because it's not my fault, but it can feel that way sometimes. So anyway, I meet with this lawyer and the lawyer tells me, first of all, you're past the statute of limitation because you have to use the drug within the year of being damaged, which I was too sick. I was in bed for 1.5 years straight. And then she said, it'd be really hard to do a class action because when you use several different drugs, how do you pinpoint which product it was? And she's like, I could get you a meeting with the FDA, but this is what you would need to have in place. And she started listing all of these different things. By the time she was done with it, I was like, no way, never mind. This has taken up way too much of my life. I don't want to be involved in this. But what happened was one thing after another just started happening. And it's like, I saw it. It's like I saw the writing on the wall. I had to do it. Like these doors were opening up. I had to say yes and get involved. So that being said, my perception of pharma back in that time too was very much, big pharma, the devil, like all that stuff, like the same anger thing. Like you want to point fingers, but the more I worked in this space and realized these are human beings, I'm sure there's bad actors like there are in every single sector of the human race. And there may be some bad agendas, but all the people that I talked to and met and told my story to, all I have been met with is shock, compassion, people willing to listen, we actually had funding for that survey around the exposure to steroids was from pharma companies. They actually said, well, we would like to know that too. And it was when I was working with Allergy and Asthma Network, but it's like, hey, that's pretty cool. And one of the reps here in Georgia, when I was working in the state on certain policy, I met someone from a drug company and I told her my story. I saw her probably like 1 year later at some event. She's like, Kelly, you won't believe it. I was talking to my hairdresser and she was telling me how her daughter has eczema and she's putting these high potency steroids on her. And I told her, stop. You have to stop that. You can't do that. And I told her your story, blah, blah, blah. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is how we change things. It's human to human, right? So it's easy to point fingers and like yell and scream at the system or the man or the whatever. And I love what Aaron Brockovich always talks about is like, we're all waiting for Superman to come in too and fix it, right? We think that it's not my job. It's this bad person's job. They need to fix it. But no, we can fix it. We just, you do what you do. You call your senator's office, you show up and you give them a little thing and then you get to be part of this amazing adventure story, right? Where it's like, I get to be part of the change. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And ultimately, like when you're watching Superman, you're Superman. You're projecting onto Superman. I think that's what it's trying to tell you. It's like, if you put your mind to it, you can save the day. And ultimately, isn't that what we want?
Yes.
Like, I think in this day and age, and I mean, you just heard me. I'm very quick to accuse big pharma and all this stuff like that. But in this day and age, I think there's just too much negativity. I'm very prone to it. I'm very sensitive to it. It's very easy for me to get negative. But I think I agree with you that if you want change, because that's, I mean, what you're telling me is very, it's very healing for me to hear that people are listening.
Yes.
People do care.
Yes.
And why wouldn't they if they could see, right?
Yes. You know, I have to tell you one more story around that, because this is very healing for me too. Because it breaks down a lot of the bias and just like the judgment that rises up in our heart, right? Because we just want justice around this. One of the first times I went to DC, it's like everywhere I go, I always tell this story because it's just like bubbling out of me. It's like, because this is, I'm so passionate about bringing change. Well, we were in DC with dermatologists. And so I was walking with this one lady from Arizona, a derm, and I was just telling her my story. I saw her I think it was maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years. We just ended up being at an event together. She's like, "Do you remember me?" And I'm like, "No," because it had literally been probably 4 years. And she's like, "You talked to me on our way to the hill and you told me your story." She's like, "Ever since then, I've treated my patients differently because I know about TSW." Isn't that cool? Like, yes. I realize we don't know how many people we're actually touching and impacting by just being willing to speak up and show up, you know?
Those moments are really magical. I've only been able to have a few because I don't have as a good a reach. I'm just a fella. But anytime I've had that, it's like, nice.
Yeah.
Or someone texts me and they're like, "I was going to use this, but then I saw what you were going through." I'm like, "Heck no, I'm not going to use this." Or I think focusing on that is really good. Because again, I mean, I said this at the beginning of the podcast, but it's so easy. Like if you go on TikTok, I try to stay away from it, but there's so many posts about how awful it is, and you got to tell the story. But I think, you know, if you're scrolling on the ITSAN Facebook page for too long, it's like, oh man, I just wish that we could all get together. We could find a solution. It's like, you know, somebody who's like covered in wounds and they're like, "Is coconut oil going to help?" Like my doctor, and you're like, "Oh no." Like, or what kills me is just seeing little kids, little like infants covered. That destroys me.
Yeah, because we've been there and we know what it's like to live in a body that looks like that, and to think of it being a child who can't verbalize and can't understand and can't process. Yeah, I went through TSW mostly alone. Like I couldn't get into the groups for a long time because it was just what I had to get through my own suffering, and then to see everybody else's was just too much. But I remember when I did finally go back to the ITSAN website, they had just come online like 3 months before I started in 2012. And then I took a break. When I came back, they had redone the website and they had some pictures of kids. And that's when, like, it was the first time I lost it. Like I remember just falling on the floor and crying my eyes out. And back in the day, it would hurt to cry. So I try not to cry because the tears on your face would just stung so bad. But I remember that's when it just gutted me. And it was like when I was finally able to start grieving, like the emotional side of it. Like, how did this ever happen? It's devastating. Wow.
Yeah. But what's really good is that the climate is it has changed. It's slow. It's a slow drip. But I remember, I think a lot of people can relate to this, but I kind of went through TSW twice, because you have a lot of people who like, they notice it and then they go to the doctor and then they go back on stronger steroids. And just back then I saw a couple different videos, maybe on YouTube. I saw ITSAN. I was like, that's not me. It's not going to happen to me. But there wasn't much. And now there's a study. There's cold atmospheric plasma. There's like so many people talking about it. There's all these different people who have gone on news channels and they're able to tell their story. That's one thing I would love to ask is, has anybody that you've spoken to in the higher positions of health, or anybody, expressed any interest in cold atmospheric plasma? Because I have seen so many. I've made friends with a lot of different people who've been to the one in Thailand, and I just think if one person in the U.S. with a big deep pocket buys the right machine, because it's not just any cap machine you buy, you have to buy the one that's for TSW skin, and starts a clinic. That could really help.
Oh man, I always think the same thing, JP. Nobody's heard about it over here that I have talked to. And it's there's a lot of buzz in our community because of, our community. But outside of that, there's not a lot of knowledge about it. So I think there's some interest, but being able to show the effects, like the pictures and having people tell their experiences, I think there probably would be interest here. It's just like you said, getting people, investors who would be willing to help start a clinic. But I think all of these things will build on each other. Like the more research we get to show this is happening to X amount of people, like even if it's an estimate, and this is what we need to provide for X amount of people. And then we could maybe get government funding for that or certain grants or whatever. But we first need to get that evidence, and we need that will displace the experts who are saying that this isn't real. We have to change that. Because some of the people on the very top in dermatology are still saying this is not happening. This isn't real, which is it's been an uphill battle for like 15 years, trying to raise enough awareness. And it's happening slowly. Like doctors who are on board, they're like, yeah, it took a while. But once you see it, now you see it everywhere. So it's just a matter of continuing to beat the drum. I've heard that sometimes it takes like up to 7 times of a person hearing a message to actually consider it for real. So that means the first time, the second time, the third time, people are going to be like, no, I don't think that's a thing. But you just keep telling the story. And again, it's like, we're not going anywhere, right? I mean, our community just keeps growing and growing and growing. And I keep telling like the people I work with, listen, I really do feel like this is a volcano and it will explode if it's not addressed. So we're trying to do it the right way. Yes, it's just a matter of time because there is a lot of anger and a lot of suffering. So we've been jumping through all the hoops, trying to, go through the right channels to bring change. But if it doesn't happen, I mean, we are going to have to start getting louder. Let's just say that.
So that brings me to another question is, hopefully there's people listening. I had a person, her name's Natalie Wright. I had her on my first podcast.
Yeah, I watched it.
Oh, you did? Great. Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Mm-hmm. And I want to keep putting out stories of people who've been to CAP, who have had other success and stuff like that for that exact reason. But for anyone listening to this, what can they do? I mean, we talked about going onto the ITSAN website, downloading all the PDFs, and just sending an email to your senator. What else can we do to actually put this forward? Because I know there's a huge community that just wants something.
Yeah. Well, what you can do right now is send a letter to the CDC saying we want a TSW diagnostic code. We just had our second review yesterday. Oh, it was September 10th. So we had submitted a proposal to introduce a TSW code into the healthcare system. So when your doctor goes to report, they can actually find it. That's going to be very helpful to show, number one, that this is a real thing, because a lot of doctors say, well, it's not in the system, it's not real. But it's also a way that we could track it, and researchers can look at prevalence, like how many people is this happening to? So it's super important that that gets done, but it's been a whole process. It went through one review in March, and then the CDC opens up for public comment. So any professional association like doctors or whatever, they can write in and say, well, we don't like that, or we want this question answered before we'll say yes and approve. So anybody can weigh in. Well, we heard from the CDC in March that our code had one of the most activity, like their most activity was around it. Yes. Lots of people weighing in. And when we first submitted it in November, I had 60 people send me letters in 1 week, which is really cool. And like I mentioned, the importance of showing up, it means something. Even if you think it's just a letter, it's not going to make a difference. Yes, it does. If you get 5 letters, it's like, okay. If you get 20, if you get 100 letters, they're going to be like, whoa, there's like huge, massive support for this. So we need to push this forward or figure it out. So in our case, it's like, let's figure it out. Yes, we want to do this, but how do we figure it out to make as many people as we can happy? So we just had our second review 2 days ago, and now it will be open comment period again for people to send a letter saying, CDC, we want you to, adopt this code and put it into the healthcare system. The ICD-11 is what the whole world uses. It's what comes out of the World Health Organization. So that's going to be another proposal, but that will be much easier once this one is accepted into the US system. So that's kind of our next steps. Another thing that people can do, and we're still in process with ITSAN in creating a patient registry. So a patient registry is a way to track people's journey. So it'll be a succession of surveys, and they'll just ask you some basic demographic information about yourself. Then they'll ask you about your history of steroid use and then your symptoms of TSW, and hopefully be able to track people for several years. This is one of the prime things that we can do as a patient advocacy group or organization that will help inform research. This is what researchers in science will look at that data and kind of analyze it and look at it in 100 different ways to figure out, who is more susceptible, what drug might be causing this more than others. Maybe even looking at Protopic and how that plays into everything. So if people will do this, it will take some time, right, to fill out surveys, but come on, we all have like half an hour every several months to fill something out. But if we had 5,000 people do that, that would be bananas. Because in research, one of the hardest things to do is get people involved in that research, like to participate in it. It's what, like clinical trials and studies at NIH, they spend a lot of money just trying to get people to get involved. Well, this is a way that our community can show up to stop this, to end it, to show, number one, that it's happening, and then what do we do to fix it? What kind of treatments are going to help? So right now it's in like the beta stages of testing, but it should be coming out in the next several months. So once ITSAN puts that call out, we would just ask everybody to participate in that. Even if you are past the worst of TSW, it doesn't matter. If you've been touched by TSW, you want to be a part of this registry.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
You got it. Yeah, I will be screaming from the hilltops when that does happen and all the way up in between.
Awesome.
we can do it. Let's make it happen.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the state resolutions too, like you said, it's so easy. It really is just getting your representative or senator to have the time to do it. Most of them are willing to do it, but sometimes they're busy with a lot of other stuff. That's why we need lots of people making the phone call, because the more people that we have do that, the better the chances that it will get done. And state work is a lot faster than federal work. So if we get 35 states that have passed a resolution, now when we go on a federal level and we can tell them that, it's going to be that much easier to get somebody to sign on the dotted side, and get that work done. So
Word.
Yeah.
Word. Yeah, that's awesome. And that's what we need to be focusing on. I think it's just, let's if at the end of my life, I can make sure that one person just does not have this happen to them where they could have, their family was all about it.
Yeah.
Everyone around them was all about it. Doctors were all about it, but they heard something.
Yeah.
That's worth it.
Yes.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you can totally relate. One thing I'd like to know, because I think you said TSW took you 9 years. Is that correct?
Oh, I'm 12 years and my skin is not perfect.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, but I'm functional. It's like I have my ups and downs like everybody else. If I'm super stressed out, my skin will act up, or if I eat terribly. But my worst years were probably the first 5, I would say. Then I started traditional Chinese medicine as well. That helped me tremendously. But it was at 4 years that I had that herpeticum outbreak, and that was terrible. And that set me back. But yeah, it takes time. It's not everybody. A lot of people get through it much faster. But these are the questions that we need to figure out. Why is it that some people take longer? Is it underlying infection? Is it because they use Protopic? Is it, we all have different bodies with different histories. So lots of questions to unearth, or answers to unearth.
Yeah, I think I was just kind of because it's really nice. I mean, you're wearing what looks like a sweater, right? I think you're wearing makeup. You said you're functional.
Yes.
Like, for a lot of people, who are lucky enough to get some sort of good treatment, like let's
Mhm.
say CAP, for example, when they're done treatment, they're not done. Like
Mhm.
their skin is around
Mhm.
70% thickness. Their
Mhm.
proliferation rate is not quite where it should be. So they still have to
Yeah.
be careful. But it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're able to do maybe most of the things you used to do, but you still have to be
Yeah.
kind of careful, as if you kind of had like eczema a little bit. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. That's what I would say. It's probably back to that.
Cool.
Even though one of the thoughts that Ian Miles, who did the study, was that epigenetic changes have taken place. So if you think of, it's not genetics, not changing the gene, but it's changing the way that the gene responds to things. So he gave the analogy of, I grew up in Denver. When I go back to Denver and I go running, I'm really out of breath, but in several days, my body remembers. And then you go
Mm.
back to that way of functioning. He said it's like you guys have literally like put your eczema on steroids. And so now your body is hyperreacts. And so then when you're exposed to another trigger, instead of reacting like you normally should, your immune system goes into this hyperreaction again. So that kind of makes sense to me.
Mm.
And he said, the hope is if we can target this problem over and over and over and over and over, the body will stop hyperreacting and go back to the way that it was supposed to be. So that's the thought
Yeah.
around using some of these supplements. But again, I feel like, do the logical things, get sunshine, exercise, eat right, lower your stress levels, get sleep, give yourself the best odds. I know sun and sea do amazing things for my skin.
Yep.
So whenever I have the opportunity to do that, I do. And yeah.
Yeah, it forces it forces people to think holistically about their body, which is again one
Yes.
of the, I think, the biggest problems with
Mhm.
our medical world is like,
Yes.
we're not a car, and even with a car you have the same problems. Like,
Right.
just because this is broken, you can't just fix that, and then other
Yep.
things happen. And I think a lot of that is happening overall in the world today. I think people are maybe through COVID and past COVID, people had the time to just be like, take a step back, right? Like,
Yeah.
what am I doing? How am I eating? How am I sleeping? Am I
Right.
happy? Is what I'm
Yes.
doing making me really happy?
Mhm.
And I and the other thing I hope is that if they do target that issue with TSW, I just hope it's not a cream. Like, you
Yes.
gotta take this cream forever, and I promise it will solve your TSW. I feel like
Right.
it's gonna be a
Right.
hard time
Like red
convincing them to do that.
flags.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
along that line of just dealing with chronic illness, I have always felt that the eczema community are the canaries in the coal mine, and that really what is affecting all of the human race with environmental toxins and the things that we're eating that are all genetically modified. And the US doesn't have as many restrictions on the chemicals that are used in everything as much as like Europe does and others. But it's like, of course it's going to show up. Our immune systems are responding to stuff in our environment. So instead of just saying, shut up to our immune system by a steroid or immunosuppressant, why don't we figure out what's actually causing the problem?
Talk to
Right?
me, eczema. What's going on?
Yes.
What are you
I
trying to
always
tell
think
me?
too, like when I was writing in my book, the picture I got in my head was a baby with a dirty diaper. And it's like you give that baby a lollipop, it'll quiet down for a while, right? It'll be happy for a while. But in the meantime, that dirty diaper is causing a lot more damage. And when that lollipop doesn't work anymore, now you got a whole worse problem. That's what I feel like steroids are.
Yeah.
It's just a sad band-aid that you're putting on, and things are just getting worse. So
Yeah, we're finding out how many licks does it take to get to the center of that Tootsie Pop. That is, and we're finding out quick.
oh
Man, oh
yeah.
my goodness. Well, that's awesome. Kelly, I really, really appreciate your time. I know you have to go soon. Your book, To Eczema with Love, is on
Yes.
Amazon for people who want to find out about that. And I'm aware that not just people with TSW, but people with eczema should read
Mhm.
it,
Yeah.
because definitely we could prevent a lot of
Oh
this.
my gosh.
Is there anything else you're working on you want to tell to people, or
Oh
what's going on?
boy. Well, I will say a little bit more about that book because it's what I wish was written 30 years ago. It's all of the information that I have learned along the way when I was bedridden, all the study that I did, but really like what do we know about eczema, the science, the treatments, There's a whole section in there for caregivers, because I know that's a big deal when you're a parent. And writing from myself as a kid, stuff that I couldn't verbalize when I was young, what I wish I could say. Hey, parents, talk to your kids like this, or here are some helpful things that you can do for your kids. And then it's also my TSW journey, which is kind of like a slog through quicksand. And I had a hard time writing that because it is just one bad thing after another. But I felt like the world needs to see this and they need to feel it. And then the last bit is a call to action. So if you go to the website for the book, it's actually cheaper than Amazon, because Amazon charges an arm and a leg to print full color copies of things. That's why it's more expensive. But I will sign a book for you, and the shipping is free if you go to 2eczemawithlove.com. So you can find my book there. Yeah.
I will put the link below, and I'll make sure everybody sees that. Kelly, thank you so much for your time once again. I'm gonna keep hearing that word. It was a pleasure talking with you.
You too, JP. Thank you so much for all you're doing. I appreciate you.
You're very welcome. Take care.
All right. See ya.
Peace out.
Bye.